Okay, so I will give you, as part of this presentation, an update, a general update on GNAT Pro. So basically, what are the latest and greatest news on our GNAT Pro products, and I will go into some details to many of our technologies. I will mainly focus on the latest version that we are finalizing right now, GNAT Pro 19. Although I will also give you at the end of this presentation a glimpse on what we are working on for, let's say, the next two versions after that, so GNAT Pro 20 and 21. So stay tuned until the end of the presentation. So first, starting with a reminder, or not, depending whether you were around last year or not. So our release schedule is actually the same every year, and the same for all our products. So we have basically every year what we call a preview release, which is done in October. So this was done, well, about 1 month ago now, well, actually mid-October, so a few weeks ago. We made available in GNAT Tracker in what we call the continuous release area, version 19.0. We call it a preview. That is, that's a preview of the 19 technologies that will be available, fully available in next February. So next February, you will have access to the official major release GNAT Pro 19.1. And here, 19.0 is a preview, which we also call, as software engineers, a beta version. So that's really how to get some initial field input and field testing from the technology while we are still finalizing it. And so we are working right now on the finalization of GNAT Pro 19. So GNAT Pro 19.1 will be available in February. And then we'll have what we call the corrective release. That is to say, minor update on top of 19.1 will be released in July next year, GNAT Pro 19.2. And this release is done on the same branch as GNAT Pro 19.1 and will contain only safe changes, safe fixes on top of 19.1. So it's really the idea that we have these branches which start last month in October with 19.0. And starting from there, we only put safe, important bug fixes and changes in the technology, which leads to GNAT Pro 19.1 in February, and then again more safe fixes between January, February, and June, July to give the 19.2 release in July, and so on and so forth. That is to say, next year in October you will see GNAT Pro 20 preview, 20.0, and again, and so on. One thing we've done also starting 2 years ago, so with GNAT Pro with version 17, is that now all our tools are using the same version scheme. That is to say, GNAT Pro, CodePeer, Spark Pro, QGen, GPS, you name it. All our tools now, which are released at the same time, that is to say in October for the preview and then in February and so on, have the same version. That's a nice property because then you know that if you want to have compatible tools, one simple answer to the question what version of GPS is compatible with this version of CodePeer or Spark Pro, for instance, well, the answer is that if you want to use Spark Pro 19.1, the simplest is to use GPS 19.1. Things are a bit more complicated when it comes to tools such as GPS, because GPS is our multiple purpose IDE, and it's actually able to drive many different tools and many different versions of tools. So in other words, you can mix GPS 19.0 with GNAT Pro 18 or 17 or even earlier versions of GNAT Pro, just to get things a bit more confusing. All right, so now let's dive a bit after this introduction on GNAT, the core GNAT package itself. That is to say, mainly, well, the compiler and compiler, debugger, and core libraries. So in GNAT Pro 19, we have first many different configurations supported, so 62 platforms and still counting. There are actually some potentially last-minute changes, but mostly that should be the final numbers. 62 platforms, 5 natives. So the 5 natives are 32 and 64-bit Linux, 32, 64-bit Windows, and 64-bit macOS. And then I won't name them because there are many, many different cross configurations. If you combine all the Windows and Linux hosts to all the various processors multiplied by the various real-time OSs that we support, then that's how you end up with that many new configurations. That's a number which is growing every year. If you remember last year, instead of 62, we were at something like 57 or 58. So it's growing every year. And here I'm only talking about the platforms which are fully active, that is to say, new versions released as part of GNAT Pro 19. That's not even counting the versions which are left a few versions behind. That is to say, these versions have been baselined or put on long-term support. They are still supported, they are still there, but they won't benefit from the latest improvements that I'm about to present. So GNAT Pro 19 supports all versions of Ada, from the very first versions, 83, up to the very latest versions. So the last official release version of Ada, Ada 2012. There is a version of Ada which is in progress being prepared. Might be Ada 2020 or Ada 22X, depending on when it's actually finalized. And there is some initial preliminary features supported of Ada 2020 also in GNAT Pro 19. GNAT Pro also supports Spark, and in particular the latest version of Spark 2014, of course. And so as part of GNAT Pro 19, we've upgraded most of the core components, the core technologies which come with GNAT Pro, in particular the code generator based on GCC, the GCC compiler. We've upgraded from GCC 6 to GCC 7 this year. And actually, to give you a bit more a long-term view on where we are going with GCC, what we've decided to do starting from last year and this year is that we will now every year upgrade to a new version of GCC, version basically N+1 of GCC. So for instance, from GCC 6 to 7, meaning that next year we'll go from GCC 7 to GCC 8 and so on. GCC 7 being basically the most, so GCC 8 was the most recent version up to recently, and we are using GCC 7 because we want also to base GNAT Pro on a stable and mature version of the technology. So that's basically the N-1 version of what's available, generally available for GCC, and we do it intentionally, not because we are behind, but because we want to be a bit behind so that we give you guys as much stability and maturity in terms of code generation as possible. We've also upgraded versions of binutils, so for everything related to assembly, to linking and assembling files. Upgraded our core debugger technology, so from GDB 7.10 to GDB 8.2. So we actually we stayed on GDB 7.10 for a few years, 2 or 3 years now, and so we did a big upgrade this year, and then we will go back to more standard upgrade every year of the GDB technology. Also upgrade on Windows to the latest, recent version of MingW, 5.0 on some platforms and actually 3.8 on others. And upgrade also to a recent version of QEMU, which is our emulator, platform emulator used as part of some bare metal products and also as part of our coverage technology. I will go back to that later. So here, I mentioned that we are supporting many dozens of different platforms. Here, this slide is about to give you an idea on all the new platforms that we've added. So the platforms that were not part of GNAT Pro 18 last year, and that is part of GNAT Pro 18 this year. So we basically added support for many configurations based on ARM 64-bit, so ARch 64 configuration processor based on Linux, well, hosted on Linux and Windows, and this one is a bare metal configuration. This one is based on Linux, and QNX and VxWorks 7. And we've also added support for the RISC-V processor, RISC-V 64-bit processor, which is a very recent processor, an interesting one. We can talk to Quentin if you want to know more and get excited about it, but that's basically, in a nutshell, a very recent potential competitor to ARM, so interesting to follow in terms of trends for you in the long term, in particular, if you are looking or if you are using ARM today. That's also a platform to consider for the future. And then PowerPC Linux hosted on Windows is new this year, as well as x86 on LinksOS 178, which we've added. We were supporting PowerPC, Links 178 so far, and so we've added x86. So GNAT on VxWorks, we are putting lots of effort in having an as-best integration as possible of GNAT on the various VxWorks configurations. So as Jamie mentioned this morning, VxWorks is a very important platform for us, and actually VxWorks with an S, a plural, which supports most processors and most versions of VxWorks, VxWorks 6, 7, 653, and the various versions around that. What we've also added is so simplifying mixed Ada C++ applications when you are using VxWorks. Along which, so that's here, and that's also this part, which is to say adding support for building GNAT using GNAT for Ada and using the WinRiver C and C++ compiler, which is now on recent versions of WinRiver VxWorks based on LLVM compiler. So we've made it simple to integrate mixed LLVM for C or C++ and GNAT for Ada applications under VxWorks. And all of that based on both command line, if you want to script automate your builds, and as well as from integrated development environment, in particular from GNATBench. I will go back to GNATBench in a few slides. libAdaLong integration. So you will actually hear more about libAdaLong later in this talk and later in other presentations, either today or tomorrow. But here in a nutshell, basically, we will provide libAdaLong. So what is libAdaLong in just a few words, because there is a separate dedicated presentation for that. libAdaLong is an Ada library which basically allows you, well, it's a library which allows you to write tools to analyze Ada code. It's basically similar to ASYS, if you know about the ASYS library, but in a more modern fashion and which works, well, basically better and faster. And what we've done as part of GNAT Pro 19 is that we have started using libAdaLong ourselves to convert some of our tools, which were based on this ASYS library, to libAdaLong. So in GNAT Pro 19, GNAT PP, our pretty printer, Ada pretty printer, is now based on libAdaLong. And what does that mean for you? Well, it's basically the same tool as before, except that it runs faster, and it starts supporting interesting features such as support for preprocessor directives. And GNAT PP will also be able to reformat your source code even if your code is not fully compilable, which is one also of the properties of libAdaLong. You can analyze Ada sources even if you don't have the full closure of your Ada sources to analyze. And so GNAT PP takes advantage of that along with others. There is more on that in a few slides. Other GNAT highlights. So as far as the compiler is concerned, so we are providing also two new switches listed here, indirect branch and function return, which are here to mitigate some of the most heard of security issues on modern processors, in particular the Spectre version 2. So these switches are compiler switches, which are ways to basically avoid or mitigate, limit issues related to this security vulnerabilities. Link time speed up on Windows. So on Windows native, if you are building lots of shared libraries, lots of DLLs, then the link time, you might have noticed that link time was very, very long. And the good news is that with GNAT Pro 19, you should see some significant speedups if you are in this configuration. A few other things, I won't go into all the details, but full ADA 2012 syntax is now used when generating C and C++ headers bindings, when generating ADA bindings for C and C++ headers. That should not make a huge difference for you. It's just that it makes the binding basically easier to generate and to use. And using the ADA 2012 syntax for the bindings does not prevent you from using another version of ADA. So you can mix your ADA 95 code, for instance, with ADA 2012 generated specs automatically. The compiler will basically put all the bits and pieces together for you. So no, this change does not mean that you won't be able to continue using fdump AdaSpec. All right, a few other things. In particular, we got some nice improvements in AWS, which is our ADA web server library. So if you are using AWS, you probably actually already know about these new features. All right, now let's switch to our IDEs. So I got some actually interesting questions during the breaks about our IDEs, which are GPS, GNAT Programming Studio, and GNAT Bench. So hopefully I will give some details and some answers for everyone here. So let's start with GPS, GNAT Programming Studio, which is our main IDE, AdaCore's main IDE. The focus we've put in GPS for the past several years, but at least in more details for the past 2 years, is really on making sure that GPS is as stable as possible and runs smoothly and as fast as possible. We've got many complaints about GPS being not stable enough or GPS being too slow when handling some large projects, when handling some cases of cross-references, source navigations. We've heard the complaints and we've worked hard. So GPS 19 is getting one step further to having certainly a much more stable interface. And as far as speed is concerned, we also have made some good progress, and we are continuing to work on that. So apart from these two main focus, which is actually taking quite a bit of energy, we also had some new improvements in GPS, in GNAT Programming Studio. So one of them is an interactive, a learn view, which is a new view in GPS, which you can put on the side of GPS or anywhere for that matter, and that will contextually get you some information, some online help on what are the potential relevant actions that you can do anywhere wherever you are in GPS. For instance, if you are in the source editor, what are the relevant shortcuts you can use in the source editor? If you are in the project explorer or in the locations view, what kind of actions can you trigger? This view, this learn view, will basically give you that in real time, helping you make the most use out of GPS, because one of the challenges with large complex IDEs such as GPS is to know basically what are all the capabilities that the IDE is providing. In many cases, most users actually use maybe 10 or 20% of what's actually available in GPS, and they don't even realize all the nice and powerful capabilities which are available. So hopefully that feature will help in this respect. Many other things. I won't go into details for all of them, but so a libadalong view to help use and develop with libadalong. One thing I actually forgot to mention as part of the libadalong slide, that so libadalong itself will be shipped precompiled as part of GNAT Pro 19. So in GNAT Pro 19, you will have a libadalong precompiled that you will be able to use. And libadalong will be fully supported, so part of your GNAT Pro subscription, if you want to use it. So improved integration with the debugger, some nice new views, registers views, being able to change variables in the debugger, improved scenario view, and improved also handling of color preferences and sim support. GNAT Bench, so GNAT Bench, that's our Eclipse plugin for ADA. And the focus has been on two things for GNAT Bench 19 this year. One is to add support for the latest version of Eclipse and Workbench. That's what we did. The latest version of Eclipse supported in GNAT Bench 19, 4.8, and we are actually finishing testing for the next release of Eclipse, which looks also promising, so most likely NetBench 19 will also support this version of Eclipse. A better integration with Workbench, improved support and integration of Ada and C++. I also mentioned it. I already mentioned it partly in previous slides. And a new user interface for runtime selection, as well as a nice new integration of GNAT. GNAT is one of our tools which knows how to drive many of our other tools, and GNAT is able to collect information between, compilers, to metrics, to coding standard checking, potentially also CodePeer and Spark, and that's basically a way to get a nice generic user interface for many of our tools in NetBench. So that's something which is available and which will give you access to many of our tools which are not supported in NetBench up to now. GNAT Dashboard, in a few words, so GNAT Dashboard is our tool aggregation and visualization. So GNAT Dashboard includes in the command line what I just described, GNAT Hub. GNAT Hub is a command line tool, part of GNAT Dashboard. And we've added support for integration with the latest long-term support version of SonarQube 6.7. And we also provide a new web interface, HTML generation from GNAT Dashboard. And I will talk more about that as part of my late evening presentation on CodePeer, so I won't give you more information here. Very quickly, in terms of other tools, so for GPR build, our multi-language builder, a few improvements, removed a few limitations, nothing major, but there are actually more interesting new major developments that are cooking up. I will come to that in a few slides. NetCheck, our qualifiable coding standard checker. So that's our coding standard checker, which is used and has been qualified several times for avionics, DO-178B and C, and also for railway. And we've implemented, as requested by some of our customers, we've implemented many new rules in NetCheck, so many new verification of coding standard rules, and we've also qualified them. Net coverage, qualifiable code coverage tool. To be honest, nothing major this year, just a few improvements to help usability of the tool. There is one major new feature which is cooking up, not in net coverage 19 but 20. So I will go back to that in a few slides. So speaking of few slides and what's cooking up, so here you've seen basically what we are preparing in what is already available today in GNAT Tracker. If you go to GNAT Tracker and you download GNAT Pro 19 Preview or GPS or GNAT Bench 19, you will see already all these features available, so you can play with them right now. This section is more about what's cooking up, what we are already working on right now, but which is not ready yet for you to take your hands on. That's still things which are pretty concrete in many cases and which will be available within 1 to 2 years, so GNAT Pro 20 or 21, typically. So one of the things we are actively working on is a new elaboration algorithm in GNAT. We know that it's a big pain point for porting Ada applications, large Ada applications, and I see JD nodding, from one version of a compiler to another, or typically from one compiler to another compiler, so here in this case to GNAT, and elaboration issues can be very tricky to get under control on very large application, multi-million applications. So we are very actively working on this new algorithm, which should hopefully solve many of these pains. GNAT Pro C++, Jimmy mentioned it a bit. So we are also working on adding C++ support for many cross configurations. So right now we support C++ only on natives, and about 1 year from now, we will support it on all the cross Linuxes, so ARM, PowerPC, x86. We will also support it on all the VxWorks 7 processors and some VxWorks 6 processors. If you want to know more, if you are interested in potentially using C++ on cross OSs, whether it's on this list or whether it's not on this list, don't hesitate to come and talk to us, because we are also putting some efforts there to complete our mixed Ada C++ offering. GNAT LLVM, that's an interesting one. So we are also working, this one is more perspective, so don't expect to have a GNAT LLVM product 1 year from now, but we are basically working on plugging the GNAT front-end, so our ADA front-end, into another code generator, so not GCC, which as I mentioned earlier, but LLVM, so that's another code generator. And so we are working on plugging GNAT with LLVM. Right now it's more on research phase, where to see, well, what results we could get out of it, how good the results would be, what kind of tools, in addition to compilers, we could get out of the LLVM ecosystem. So that's where we are. If you want to know more, if you're interested in the kind of results we already have on plugging and mixing GNAT and LLVM, don't hesitate to come and talk to me after this presentation. So GNAT coverage, one of the interesting things we are working on, and hopefully will be in GNAT coverage 20, 1 year from now, is adding support for source instrumentation. So right now, GNAT coverage supports code coverage via an emulator, target emulator, QEMU, or via hardware probes, but it does not generate instrumented sources like most of the code coverage tools do. And that can be an issue on some platforms. You cannot easily get traces out of an emulator or out of a hardware probe. So source instrumentation will be basically a way to complete our offering in terms of code coverage and hopefully give you guys access to GNAT coverage everywhere. So GPR build, and the GPR tools. We are actively working on basically the new generation, which we call GPR2, of our libraries and tools, which means that GPR build will take advantage of more flexible build and more efficient build capabilities. And we will also provide to you better libraries to be able to parse project files or GPR files to, again, make your own tools. So in complement to libadalong for parsing ADA files, we'll also provide new generation of library, which we call libgpr2, to be able to use our project files, GPR files. So libadalong and tools. Libadalong will, in our IDEs, will replace all the source navigation capabilities, cross-reference capabilities, refactoring capabilities that we have in GPS and NetBench. We are working right now actively on providing all these capabilities and more in the future, in particular more refactoring capabilities will soon be available in GPS and NetBench thanks to the use of libadalong. We will also, it's almost done actually in our GNAT Pro 20 wavefronts already. We have already transitioned GNAT stubbing capability for ADA, and GNAT metric, computation of metrics, to libadalong. So these tools have been transitioned now to libadalong, and NetCheck is next on the list.